I say the word Pentecost to you, what does it mean? Do you really understand what it meant when the Holy Spirit came upon Jesus' men and women at that time? Spend some moments with us this morning. Let's share together. Hello, I'm glad you could be with us today. We're on the most vital subject. We're studying the book of Acts. I love going through the book of Acts because it's a book that moves. It's a book of action. It's a book of the action of the Holy Spirit in the lives of the apostles. But today we come to chapter 2 and the first 4 verses. We're going to talk about Pentecost. Let's read it together. Acts chapter 2 verse 1. When the day of Pentecost came, they were all together in one place. Or as the King James Version puts it, and when the day of Pentecost was fully come, they were all with one accord in one place. Just keep that in your mind for a minute. We'll come back to it. Verse 2. Suddenly a sound like the blowing of a violent wind came from the heaven and filled the whole house where they were sitting. And they saw what seemed to be tongues of fire that separated and came to rest on each one of them. And all of them were filled with the Holy Spirit and began to speak in other tongues as the Spirit enabled them. Now here's a phenomena that in the natural we don't fully understand. But what's going on here, and what's the teaching of the Holy Spirit for you and for me? Let's go back to verse 1 and see the importance of unity among God's people so far as the Holy Spirit is concerned. And when the day of Pentecost was fully come, they were all with one accord in one place. Underline in your own heart and mind the word one. I don't think for 1 minute it means that they agreed on everything. I think we've got to get rid of that idea straight away. These were human beings. They were human beings who were ready to be taken over by the Holy Spirit, but they were still human beings, and nobody ever agrees with everybody else. It simply doesn't happen. But they were together with one purpose. They were together with one mind. They were together worshiping. They were together praying. And they were together and open for the promise of the Father that Jesus had talked about. In all that, they were ready for the Holy Spirit. Conversely, when we're in a group, in a church, in a Bible study, wherever it is that we meet with other Christians, if we're in disunity, if we're in disarray, if we have arguments, then straight away nothing is happening by the Holy Spirit. It's as though the Holy Spirit says, now look friends, get your act right, get straightened out in your relationships, and I'll be back. And until then, I won't. All together in one place. And there's the unity. And of course in that, they were an answer to the prayer that Jesus prayed. You remember we studied it together just before Easter. In John chapter 17, when he's praying to his Father, listen to what he says. Verse 21. That they may all of them be one, Father, just as you are in me and I am in you. May they also be one in us, so that the world may believe that you've sent me. I've given them the glory that you gave me, that they may be one as we are one. The only thing Jesus wanted for his people, for you and for me, is that we might be one, that we might be in unity, as he was with God his Father. I still believe what I said to you that morning when I talked about those verses. I believe Jesus stands there with tears coursing down his cheeks when he sees the divisions among his people. This denomination won't talk to that one. The Protestants won't talk to the Catholics. And on it goes. That's not what Jesus intended. He wanted a unity of purpose, a unity of spirit. Yes, it's true. There may be different ways of running our churches. There may be different ways of worshiping. One appeals to one and one appeals to another. But we should still be able to come together around his table and have Holy Communion or the Holy Eucharist or the communion service, or the Mass, or whatever you call it, because it's all the same thing. It's where we celebrate the death of Jesus Christ, and friends, we can't even do that together. No wonder we lack the power of the Holy Spirit throughout our people. There was a unity there that day, and when there's unity, the Spirit flows, and when there's disunity, the Holy Spirit leaves. He doesn't leave us, but he leaves the group. And when we get our act together and when we get unified, he's back. Then in verses 2 and 3, poor Luke, writing to Theophilus, tries to describe the indescribable. How can you describe the Spirit in material terms? Well, of course, the answer is you can't, however you try. And so he says some things that I think we must note. Note verses 2 and 3 of Acts chapter 2. First of all, suddenly a sound like the blowing of a violent wind came from heaven and filled the whole house where they were sitting. Now, it does not mean the Holy Spirit is the wind, or the wind is the Holy Spirit. He says it was like, it's as though. He's not saying it is, but you can't describe it. And he said it was as though a mighty wind came. Now, in the symbolism of the wind, I think we understand a lot about the Holy Spirit. Notice, will you, you never see the wind. You never know where it came from. You never know where it went to. All you know is its incredible effect upon things and people. And we've seen some tornadoes. And we've seen the work of the wind in and around our country. It's absolutely incredible what the wind does. But you never see it. And it's just the same with the Holy Spirit. You never see him. You never know where he came from. You never know where he's going to. But you see his effect. You see his effect in this person's life. You see his effect in this group. You see his effect in this church. You see the work of the Holy Spirit. You just don't see him. He's there and he's gone. He's there and he's gone. But always moving and very powerful. You've seen the wind lift the roof off, overturn a car, move things here, move things there. Yes, the Holy Spirit is a powerful force. And then Luke goes on, and in verse 3, he said they saw what seemed to be like tongues of fire that separated and came to rest on each of them. It seemed like tongues of fire. He didn't say it was, but he's trying to describe the indescribable. Now, again, in the fire, I see the work of the Holy Spirit. For the Holy Spirit purifies as fire purifies. You know how they take metal or ore and they put it in a little crucible and they begin to apply the heat, and the heat takes out all the impurities until in that container you have the pure metal ore. Well, it's exactly the same with the Holy Spirit. He takes you and he just applies a little heat here and a little heat there, and he produces in you the pure person, taking out all those things that stain you and spoil you and just destroy you, and he brings through what is beautiful, what is true, what is of Jesus. That's the work of the Holy Spirit, and he'll do that in any life that allows him. So here the Holy Spirit came upon his men, and then something absolutely incredible happened. Let's look at verse 4. All of them were filled with the Holy Spirit and began to speak in other tongues as the Holy Spirit enabled them. Let's start at the back and go forward. I guess the subject of tongues has become more controversial than any other. Let me say straight away, as far as I can see in the New Testament, it's a very valid gift. I don't find anywhere that it suggests it should cease. Of course, 1 Corinthians 13:8 says it will cease one day, but so will knowledge. And certainly knowledge hasn't stopped yet. In fact, in our generation, it's increased tremendously. So I believe the gift of tongues can still continue. When you see knowledge cease, you can reckon that the tongues will cease too. But also, notice what else is being said here. It says, and began to speak in other tongues as the Spirit enabled them. First of all, it was from the Holy Spirit. Secondly, it was a language, which we'll find in the next verses. People could understand the language. Therefore, the true gift of the Holy Spirit is always a language. Either a language that's known or unknown, or a language that's a heavenly language. But it's a language. Well, you say, just a minute, Richard. Can't the devil counterfeit tongues? Yes, he can and does. Well, then how do I know that if I speak in tongues, it's not counterfeit? Well, for this very simple reason. If you have your life centered on Jesus Christ, if your life is producing the fruits of the Spirit, and you have a gift of tongues, you can be pretty certain that what you're praying is of the Holy Spirit. After all, the Holy Spirit's not going to allow the devil to produce something else in you. On the other hand, if your life is not centered on Jesus Christ, yes, you do believe, or you're involved in some cult that say that Jesus Christ is Lord but never show it. If Jesus Christ is not Lord, then friend, you better be very suspicious about any gift of tongues that you have received. For it probably is false. And yes, there are false tongues, but I think there are far more real tongues today than false ones. But then notice the first part. And all of them were filled with the Holy Spirit. On Tuesday we talked about the baptism, the filling of the Holy Spirit. Well, you say, just a minute, Richard, what's the difference? I see it this way. The first time you receive the filling of the Holy Spirit, you can call it the baptism. After that, you need to be filled every day. Malcolm Smith and I agree on a lot, but we disagree on this. I think we leak. He doesn't think we do. I think as you go through this world, you find that the Holy Spirit has not left you, but it seems you're not filled again because somewhere along the road you've taken in some thoughts from the world, some ways of the world, and you have to get rid of them, and you have to be filled again and again and again. And I believe that's why Paul says in Ephesians, go on being filled in the Spirit. Every day of your life, empty self and ask for the filling of the Spirit. Every day, don't miss. If you miss, you'll know the difference, and so will the family, and so will the people you work with. They won't know what it is, but they'll know you're different that day. You're not what you were yesterday. Why? Because you've not been filled with God's Spirit. We need to be filled every day of our lives, and all these men were filled. Remember what I said on Tuesday. How do I become filled with the Holy Spirit? I have to give up self. I have to give up pride. I have to give up ego. And as I empty myself of that unholy trinity, as self is given over to Jesus and surrendered to Jesus and committed to Jesus, then the Holy Spirit who dwells within Richard can begin to fill him. You see, it's rather a misnomer in some senses to say the baptism of the Holy Spirit when the Holy Spirit dwells within us. It's as though we're looking for something outside when someone is already inside. But once you get rid of self, those channels are open, and the Holy Spirit who dwells within you can flow through you and fill you in every part of your being, in every part of your personality. He can make you a totally new person in Jesus Christ. And he will do that every day of your life. All of them were filled with the Holy Spirit. And when they were filled with the Holy Spirit, they spoke in tongues and they received the power that Jesus had talked about in Acts 1 verse 8. They became powerful people. They had been scared and now they had no fear whatsoever. They stood up with courage. They stood up boldly and they preached the resurrected Jesus Christ in Jerusalem. The place where Jesus had died. The place where they were so afraid they'd been in the upper room, locked the doors for fear of the Jews. What had happened? They received the Holy Spirit. They received his filling. They were people who were changed. And we can be the same.